Protecting the drug mule children calls for a new law to clamp down on the grooming gangs. Yesterday, ITV News revealed the scale of the exploitation of youngsters forced to ferry drugs. Today, there are demands for action.
Everybody knows who these gangsters are. You can talk to people in the community and they will tell you the names of them and they will tell you what they are up to.
Also tonight, the bout in Glasgow that left this British boxer fighting for his life.
Ending with a bang, not a whimper, how the Rosetta space mission came to a close.
And naming and shaming the restaurant chains that fail to curb the calories.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mark Austin and Charlene White.
Good evening. There have been growing calls today for a new law to protect thousands of children being groomed as drug mules across Britain. A report on this programme last night revealed the scale of the problem, with children as young as 12 being forced to transport cocaine, heroin and other Class A substances for drug-running gangs.
Following our reports, police, child protection experts and a senior MP have said authorities need new legislation to crack down on the modern-day Fagans. One teenage victim told us that when he tried to leave, gang leaders threatened his mother. Our national editor, Allegra Stratton, has our special report.
Cambridgeshire police raid a property in London. They suspect these men have been involved in sending a young girl to Cambridge to sell drugs.
Hey, why don't you head when you get in, yeah?
Proving this is very difficult. Leon was only 14 when he was first drawn into working for drug dealers. When he told them he didn't want to carry drugs anymore, he was threatened, told he was in debt and forced to sell heroin and crack cocaine hundreds of miles from home.
One of them punched me in the eye and then was like, "You have to do this. If you don't do it, we're going to go around to your mum's house, break the door and basically hurt my mum." And that's what really put the fear into me.
He only escaped the dealers when he was sent to prison. He's since turned his life around.
It's not like a young person wakes up and thinks, okay, tomorrow I'm going to sell drugs. It's something they're groomed into, because no one starts off going away to Wales, Scotland to see crack and heroin. It's not a nice life.
All too often, it's the boys and girls on the front line of the drugs trade that are arrested, not the criminals exploiting them. One of the problems for the police trying to tackle this crime is that there is no legislation specifically designed to target modern-day Fagans. There are attempts being made in the courts right now to use human trafficking legislation, but as yet, no one has been successfully prosecuted for the criminal exploitation of children born and living in Britain. One former senior police officer who dealt with child exploitation says the time has come for a law that explicitly deals with this.
We've got to create a new law, drafting a piece of legislation that stigmatises gangsters, that says if you use a child as an instrument of crime to carry product from A to B, to carry a message from A to B, whether you do it in person, whether you do it over social media, or whether you do it by a text, you commit a criminal offence, which we'll call, a criminal child exploitation. That labels the gangster in the way they should be, because in essence they're a child abuser.
Labour MP Anne Coffey is proposing the introduction of a civil order, like an antisocial behaviour order, that will keep known drug dealers away from young vulnerable people.
I would like to see the introduction of a Fagan order. So when a local gangster targets a needy, vulnerable child, offering them gifts with a view to engaging them in criminal activity, as soon as he makes those overtures, an order is served forbidding him any further contact with that child.
The police officer leading Trident, Britain's specialist gang unit, says they are getting to grips with the problem and have recognised the need to help young people caught up in this criminal world.
I think they're victims. I think it's a safeguarding issue. They are identified as vulnerable by the dealers, and then that is exploited. The men and women on my command will do all they can to prosecute individuals that are running these networks, and we'll do all we can to prevent young people being forced into that way of life.
It's a problem that has spiralled out of control. Police forces across Britain are struggling to tackle criminals headquartered hundreds of miles away. Theresa May, as Home Secretary, did much to end exploitation. As Prime Minister, she may need to finish the job.
So, Allegra, one thing, of course, to call for a new law, another thing altogether for it to actually happen.
Indeed. The official line is that they don't need a new law if they're just creative and aggressive about using current human trafficking legislation. Eventually they get their prosecution, except they have had no prosecution so far. Over the course of our investigation, we talked to lots of police officers on the ground who are trying to do this kind of prosecuting. It's really complex. They are saying to us they do need new, clearer legislation.
All right, Allegra, thank you very much indeed.
A British boxer is fighting for his life in hospital tonight after he was critically injured in a bout in Glasgow. Mike Towell was knocked down twice before the referees stopped the fight.
He was given oxygen before being stretchered from the ring. His family and manager have been by his bedside. And a warning, this report from Sally Lockwood contains footage of the fight.
The stage is set.
This match was the biggest moment of Mike Towell's undefeated career so far. He was knocked down in the first round, and after a standing count from referee Victor Loughlin, Towell regained his footing and continued. But in round 5, the Scotsman was struggling, and the referee stopped the fight.
It is going to continue, but you wonder.
Towell received treatment in the ring, Welshman Dale Evans clapping his opponent as he was stretchered off. But the gravity of the situation at that point wasn't clear.
I know he can punch just like myself, and it was either going to be me or him, and I knew that fight wasn't going the distance, but nobody ever wants to see someone getting stretchered out of the ring, and I really do hope he's all right.
But Mike Towell was taken to hospital in Glasgow in a critical condition where he's now fighting for his life, his family at his bedside. The same referee was in charge of Nick Blackwell's match in March against Chris Eubank Jr. Blackwell suffered bleeding on the brain and was placed into a medically induced coma. He recovered, but that fight ended his career. At 25 years old, Mike Towell is one of Scotland's promising sportsmen. And tonight, the thoughts of everyone in the boxing world are with him and his family. Sally Lockwood, ITV News.
Today marks the first anniversary of Russia's air campaign in Syria, credited with turning the balance of power in favour of President Assad. But it comes at a terrible cost to people in places like eastern Aleppo and Idlib. More than 100 children have been killed there in the past 2 weeks alone. The suffering is so relentless that when a baby was pulled alive from the rubble of another destroyed building, it brought the horror home to her tearful rescuer, as Dan Rivers reports.
In the gathering gloom of another bloody day in Syria, a crowd at the site of yet another airstrike. Somehow, amid so much death, a baby girl has been found alive. A tiny miracle amid such despair. The tears as they race to hospital, coming not just from the infant, but also from the man who found her. Syria's war has sunk to such levels of depravity this week, many have reached their breaking point. We've been working for 2 or 3 hours to free her, he says. She's just a month old. They rush into the hospital, which, like all in rebel-held Syria, is short of supplies and doctors, but not of patients. Somehow she seems to have escaped major injury, but even here she isn't safe from the bombs. And what of her future in a country where war apparently no longer has any limits?
Dan Rivers on the latest appalling scenes from Syria. Now on to other news. Here, a man's admitted he mowed down a child actor and his aunt in a police chase. 10-year-old Micaiah McDermott and Rosie Cooper were killed in South London last month. At the Old Bailey today, Joshua Dobbie admitted he caused their deaths but denied manslaughter.
South Yorkshire police say the search for missing toddler Ben Needham on Kos can continue as planned. It was halted temporarily this morning after ancient remains were found. Officers are acting on new information that Ben may have been killed in an accident there.
And two Vincent van Gogh paintings, which were stolen 14 years ago, have been found by police in Italy. The paintings were taken during a dramatic raid on the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam in 2002. They were found in a house near Pompeii.
The Rosetta probe reached mission's end today after a 4 billion mile, 12-year journey through space. It crashed into the comet it had been tracking, sending back pictures and data right up until the final moment. Rosetta has helped change what we know about comets and even how the Earth itself evolved, as our science correspondent Alok Jha explains.
The last images from Rosetta. This one was taken 20 kilometres from the surface of Comet 67P. This one at 16, 6, and this, the very final picture taken from just 50 metres away, so close that Rosetta's cameras couldn't focus. At Mission Control in Darmstadt, they had to wait 40 minutes for signals to travel the 450 million miles from Comet 67P. At 12:20 p.m, they lost contact with Rosetta. Confirmation of impact. A bittersweet moment.
It's a very sad moment. I lived it with many missions, and this one in particular, I worked for 20 years on it. It was a long mission. It was such a unique one. It's very sad to lose the signal, always.
The Rosetta mission launched in March 2004, orbiting the Sun 3 times before flying past Mars in February 2007. More than a decade after its launch, Rosetta arrived at its destination in August 2014. And just 3 months later dropped the Philae lander onto the moving comet. Meanwhile, Rosetta carried on orbiting until today, when it collided with the comet at walking pace. Engineers in the UK, some of whom had worked on building Rosetta decades ago, gathered to watch its final moments with great pride.
Not only great pride in its success, but also because it's landed on a comet, it will be on that comet for thousands of years. Something that I did and my children and grandchildren can be proud of.
Rosetta has transformed what we know about comets and the earliest years of our solar system, but scientists have only begun to examine the probe's data. There'll be scientific insights from this mission for decades to come. Alok Jha, ITV News.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News. Reduced pudding sizes or face being named and shamed. The government's threat to restaurants and cafes.
And saved by the twitch of a toe, the woman who recovered after doctors had given up hope. Those stories and more right after the break.
Welcome back. Now, if you're eating out tonight or this weekend, then here's some food for thought. The government is threatening to name and shame restaurant chains, cafes and pubs who don't reduce sugar in desserts and make portions smaller. As part of the drive to tackle obesity, food companies have been told they must help reduce the nation's waistlines. As our consumer editor Chris Troy explains.
We might be forgiven for succumbing to temptation, but cafes and restaurants will be held accountable. Officials are linking puddings with public health, and experts say it's long overdue.
When you eat out of home, you have no idea what it is that's in the food that you're about to consume, unless you have an extremely experienced chef who will be able to tell you exactly what he's put on it.
We compared the top UK food chains' puddings against the recommended daily sugar limit for adults of 90 grams. McDonald's Kit Kat McFlurry has 53 grams of sugar. That's more than half of the adult maximum recommended limit. At Wetherspoon's, warm chocolate fudge cake with ice cream has 103 grams of sugar, far in excess of that daily recommendation. And at Pizza Hut, the caramel and white chocolate cookie dough contains 61 grams of sugar.
When we spoke to those companies, some said, surely it's obvious that something like this is just an occasional treat. But the reality is we're dining out more and more as a nation, and if you're not in charge of the ingredients, it's easy to get carried away.
The food industry says it's working with government and is reformulating recipes, but there's now growing pressure for catering outlets to match supermarkets in sugar reduction.
Well, now we eat a lot of our food out of our homes. We're eating it on the move, we're eating it at work, we're maybe going out in the evening, we're maybe having a takeaway. So, and a typical family in Britain now spends about a third of their food and drink budget on eating out.
The government is already challenging the food industry. The question is, can it now tackle something just as powerful? Temptation. Chris Choi, ITV News.
Former Israeli leader Shimon Peres was hailed a great visionary today as world leaders gathered at his funeral. Bill Clinton said the 93-year-old, who died earlier this week, had worked hard to achieve peace. But the current US President, Barack Obama, said the attendance of the Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas was a reminder of how much work still remained to be done. From Jerusalem, here's our Middle East correspondent, Geraint Vincent.
For presidents, prime ministers and princes across the globe, Shimon Peres was Israel's best-loved statesman, and they lined up in Jerusalem this morning to pay tribute to him.
That so many leaders came from around the world to bid farewell to Shimon is a testament to his optimism, his quest for peace, his love of Israel.
Shimon Peres spent 70 years in the service of his country, and his priority was always Israel's defence. He built up its military and encouraged the Jewish settlement of land Israel had won in wars against its Arab neighbours. But he came to believe that peaceful engagement with the Palestinians was the best way to protect Israel, and he was one of the architects of a coexistence agreement with them. One of the men with whom Peres struck that deal, Mahmoud Abbas, was here to honour him today, and his handshake with Israel's current Prime Minister was an extremely rare event, because that deal has still not brought peace.
Even in the face of terrorist attacks, even after repeated disappointments at the negotiation table, he insisted that as human beings, Palestinians must be seen as equal in dignity to Jews and must therefore be equal in self-determination.
His life's work remains incomplete. The peace process is unfinished business. But today the world thanked Shimon Peres for what he did to get it started. Geraint Vincent, ITV News, Jerusalem.
Sport now, and the Ryder Cup is underway tonight, one of the biggest weekends in the golfing calendar. But Europe's hopes of a fourth successive victory over the US have already suffered a setback. In the morning mist in Minnesota, it was Justin Rose who got the tournament started. His opening drive went straight down the middle of the fairway. But America's Ricky Fowler provided one of the highlights of the opening holes, chipping in from off the green.
Good direction too. First point of the day.
And it was downhill from there for the European team. The US won all four of the opening matches to take a 4-0 lead.
Plenty of time for Europe to come back. And finally tonight, how a woman cheated death thanks to the wiggle of her big toe. 22-year-old Sam Hemming was left in a coma for weeks after an horrific car crash.
Doctors advised her grief-stricken parents it was time to turn off her life support and to prepare for the worst. But just moments before they did so, they noticed signs of life. Here's Ben Chapman.
It is mum and daughter time Carol Hemming thought they would never again share. Just 3 months ago, Sam was in a car crash so serious it left her in a coma. After 6 days lying brain dead, not responding to tests, her family were hours away from turning off her life support machine and letting her die.
They got to the stage where they didn't think Sammy would make it to 7 days anyway because of the severity of her injuries. The nurse accidentally dropped one nappy wipe, just one, and it brushed past Sam's right big toe. And the big toe moved and I squealed so loud, poor nurse, at my husband, and it showed there was something going on.
2 weeks later, Sam was out of the coma, despite doctors having been convinced there was no hope of recovery. She has no memory of the crash and relies on her mum for the story of that miraculous moment.
Thank God for my big toe. But now I'm like, oh yeah, I'm still here, still going. But it's a weird thought thinking I was that close to being switched off.
The girl's a miracle. She proved them all. If it wasn't for her fitness level being to what it was, and the amazing medical staff she had working with her, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and I wouldn't be sat next to my girl.
Sam has some brain damage but hopes to continue studying law next year, as determined to fully live her life as she was to cling on to it that day. Ben Chapman, ITV News, Hereford.
And that is about it for now. Julie Etchingham is here at 10.
But for more of us here, goodbye.
Bye-bye.